Okay, so good evening, everybody. Let's start off with our motivation. And especially with an appreciation of being alive and having access to the teachings and living in a place free from warfare and turbulence so that we can actually hear the teachings and have the opportunity to take them in and practice them. But since this opportunity doesn't last so long and our lives are disappearing moment by moment, it's important that we really focus and take advantage of this time rather than take it for granted. And so to do that, we want to really expand our motivation, expand the reason why we're here, to include the welfare of all living beings. Because they're just like us, wanting happiness, not wanting suffering. And if we can improve the state of our own mind by listening and practicing the teachings, then we can be of greater and greater benefit to all these living beings. So not just to ourselves, but to everybody else as well. And so that expansive motivation that reaches out with compassion to all living beings, and the expansive motivation that seeks spiritual freedom, spiritual enlightenment, so that we can benefit others most effectively, then that motivation, which is also called the bodhicitta, is something truly admirable, truly miraculous to generate. So as much as we can, even though our bodhicittas may be a bit fabricated, let's generate it and make that our reason for being here, not only this evening, but for the weekend to come. So before we start up all our teachings, we always generate a motivation like this. And today, I think it's, for me anyway, it's a little bit more weighty than usual because of what's going on in the planet. You know, that there really is warfare yet again in the Middle East with Hamas shooting rockets at Israel, and Israel now doing a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. So we know that lots of people are going to get killed, and lots of people are going to their body will continue to live, but their mind will be forever changed. I spent some time teaching Buddhism in Israel over the years, and it's kind of a country where almost everybody has some form of PTSD. Yeah, just because of the living situation there. It's it's a difficult environment. So, doesn't matter which side you're on, the winning or losing side. Everybody loses. Yeah, so to see that going on, and then this flight that got blown up, and like, what in the world is going on? They seem, they don't know exactly who blew it up, or why they blew it up, or whether it was an accident, or something deliberate. But, it's definitely tragic. And I was thinking of those people, because I travel by air a lot. And so, they had probably been in the air maybe about 2 hours, hour and a half by that time. So you're just settling in, figuring out what you're going to do on this long flight. And then, the death must happen very quickly. I don't know if they would have heard the missile coming or not, or what happened, but one moment you have this conception of being you and this life and what you're doing, and then the next moment like that, you're in the intermediate stage. Your body's gone, your ego identity's gone, and you don't have a clue what in the world is happening. And so, thinking about that, and how most of the world is not really focused on the experience of the people who got killed, but in what all of this is going to mean. Because if it was a Russian missile, or if it was a Ukrainian one that the separatists had, or a Russian one that they gave to the separatists, or who knows what, apparently it can influence a lot of what happens in the future. Because you know how it is, one event happens, then everybody's mind starts concocting stories upon stories, and what ifs, and this and that, and pretty soon, World War I, the whole world got involved in a war because, a Duke and Duchess were killed. Yeah, so small things, because of people's tendency to fabricate stories. We have a Buddhist term for this. It's called prapancha, or proliferation. The mind proliferates with ideas, with emotions, with suppositions, with opinions, with assumptions, and then acts on all these things that are merely the proliferation of the mind. And in this way cause a lot of suffering to ourselves and to others. So in saying that we have the space today, at this time to be here and to hear teachings, when we think of all the other experiences that living beings are having on this planet today, we're indeed quite remarkably fortunate. And so to really take advantage of this by having a big motivation, So instead of a small motivation, me and my problems, and I'm uncomfortable, and so doesn't like me, and I wonder what these people think about me, and my whole life is falling apart. I don't have the most modern iPhone. Instead of iPhone, 6 or 7 or whatever they have, I only have 3 or 4. And all my friends have 6 or 7. And I just can't afford it. And what are they going to think of me? And you know how we bellyache from day to day? Yeah? Anybody here a bellyacher? Yeah? We'll find something to bellyache about. So, to see that our bellyaches are really rather inconsequential, given the what's going on for the rest of the living beings. And this kind of reflection, I don't know, for me, really wakes me up. Yeah. I know we, at least people my generation, when we grew up, we were told, don't complain, there are children starving in China. And we used to say, I didn't ask them to starve, but this was somehow a reason why we should eat all of our food. They're starving, so we should eat. And, being spoiled American brats, if I can speak for myself, and maybe a few other people, we had no idea of really, or appreciation, really, of what was going on in China at that time. And that we actually were very fortunate. I don't think that means that we had to overeat to compensate. That certainly didn't feed the Chinese children. But, if we had had some more awareness of our fortune, then, not getting a Valentine, not being invited to somebody's birthday party, all that stuff that we cried about as children, that we still cry about as adults, except we kind of pretend we don't, but we don't get invited somewhere, and so it just puts our life in a greater perspective, I think, if we can really appreciate the wide diversity of sentient beings' experience now. And so in this text that we're studying by Aryadeva, the 400, the text is chiefly about, is leading up to and then explicitly about the nature of reality, the ultimate nature of reality, because wisdom that realizes this is what liberates us from cyclic existence. And so if we really appreciate our present opportunity and we want to make it useful for all sentient beings in the highest, most noble way, then we will seek this kind of full awakening for the benefit and have a commitment and an aspiration in our own hearts to understand the nature of reality, even if it's difficult to understand. Okay? So we generate that motivation because it makes our mind, gives our mind some strength, so that when we get into this teaching and we're going, what is he talking about? That we'll realize it's okay. We don't have to understand everything right now. We can get seeds planted in our mind stream, understand what we're capable of and make use of it right now, and know that the more we practice and the more we learn, the more we'll understand in the future. And even if we understand a little bit now, it helps us get closer to that realization of the nature of reality. Okay? So we're just starting chapter 11. Yeah, the book has 16 chapters. So we did 9, 10. Yeah, chapter 11. Okay, so chapter 11 is about refuting truly existent functional phenomena. Okay, truly existent functional phenomena. A functional phenomena means something that functions, that performs a purpose. And anything that performs a purpose, the chief purpose it's referring to here is the purpose of giving rise to an effect. So functioning phenomena are things that arise due to causes and produce effects that come after them. So we're a functioning phenomena. The table, the telephone, all these things around us are functioning phenomena. They change, they're impermanent. Impermanent here, meaning that they change moment to moment. Okay? So we're going to be talking about functional phenomena and refuting that these kind of functional phenomena can be what is called truly existent. Truly existent means that something exists from its own side. Okay? That it has its own nature inside of itself. And this nature doesn't depend on anything else. Okay? So, when we look at the telephone, we think, yes, this has the nature of a telephone right here inside of it. Because we look at it, and it's like anybody who walks in this room knows it's a telephone. Anybody who walks in knows this is a cup, because it has the nature of cup from its own side. So that's what we call true existence. That's how we think things exist, but in actual fact, they don't exist that way. Yeah, because everything is dependent on other factors, and truly existent things cannot depend on anything else because they have their own nature. Okay? So in this chapter, we're explicitly refuting truly existent time, because time, past, present, and future, time is a functioning phenomena. It arises and ceases each moment. Yeah? And we think everything, has its own nature in time, and is truly existent, but in fact, it isn't. Okay, so we're going to be refuting this truly existent, or another synonymous term is substantially existent time. Okay, so we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks, just the background. So I just want to review a couple of things so that we're on the same page. Okay, so this may sound strange the first time you hear it, okay? But we're going to be talking about, the past, present, and future. So in terms of one object, the future of the object comes first. Okay? So the future is what has not arisen, but its causes for it to arise exist. Okay? So, shall we go back to our example of cake? We used this last time. Yeah. So the cake that we're going to have tomorrow is a future cake. Yeah. So the future cake exists before the present cake, because it's tomorrow's cake. Okay? So tomorrow's cake is not a real cake. It's not a cake at all. When we say tomorrow's cake or future cake, what we're talking about is a cake that has not yet arisen, has not yet come into being, but the causes for it exist. Okay? So first, there's a future cake. Then, tomorrow, let's say, somebody cooks the cake, then we have the present cake. Okay? Then, make believe that nobody eats the cake. Yeah, so that's why I said make believe, because that's not going to be true. But let's say, make believe they forget to put the cake out, okay? So the cake's sitting in the kitchen, then it becomes a past cake. Another way, it's a cake that has arisen and has already ceased. Okay? So first there's the future cake, then there's the present cake, then there's the past cake. Okay? The present cake is the only thing that's really the cake. Okay? Because the future hasn't happened yet. The past is already over. So even though we say future cake and past cake, those are not actual cakes. They're actually what we call affirming negatives. Okay? So in the case of the future cake, the future cake, it's an affirming negative. So something's being affirmed and something's being negated. What's being negated in the future cake is the sprouts having arisen already.
The cake's having arisen.
Oh, I shift from cake to sprout. Good. Okay, this says sprout. Okay. You see, usually in Buddhism we're doing gardening classes. Now we're doing cooking classes. Okay, so the future cake eliminates the cake's having arisen because it hasn't already arisen, because it's still the future cake. Okay, so it eliminates that. And what it affirms or implies is that the future cake, the future cake is a functioning thing. Sorry. The future cake is a functioning thing that is the non-completion of the conditions for its arising, given that the causes for its arising exist. Okay, so all that means is what's being eliminated is that the cake has come into being, because it hasn't come into being. And what is being affirmed is that the cake is a functioning thing that's changing moment by moment. That is, in this case, being the future cake, it's the completion of all the causes and conditions for the cake coming together, given that those causes and conditions are things that exist. Okay? And then the past cake is also an affirming negative. What's being negated or is eliminated is the cake's not having disintegrated, because it's the past cake, so the cake has disintegrated. So it's negating that the cake has not disintegrated, and it is applying or affirming that the disintegration of the cake occurs in dependence upon the cake, which makes sense, because you can't have a disintegrating cake unless you have a cake. Okay? So that's the way our school, we're the good guys, the prasangikas, the madhyamakas, We're the good guys. That's our position. Yeah. Then these other people who don't have the right idea, but whose idea actually makes sense to us when we think about it, because it's very close to our ordinary way of thinking. So we never really put down these other guys, because there's an element of their way of thinking in us too. Okay? And so that's why we go through all these discussions, to see those hidden elements and assumptions in our own mind, so we can bring them up to the forefront and then refute them and prove to ourselves that a lot of what we believe is nonsense. Okay? So the Vaibhasikas, which is one Buddhist school, okay, so they say, we're going to shift from cakes to pots, okay? They say that a pot exists at the time of a past pot, and a pot exists even at the time of the future pot. Okay? So what do you think? Does one part of your mind, because we grew up with this whole idea of going backwards and forwards in time. And remember when we heard about time machines? It was almost as if the past is kind of already, it's going on right now, except it's the past repeating itself, and the future is going on right now, you know. So it's, you know, we kind of have this idea as though the past and the future are existing, and they're already happening right now. You know, and if we could just get this correct time machine, we could, you know, what does it go? Well, go faster than the speed of light, or whatever it is, and somehow get ourselves into the past and relive the past, although why you'd want to do that is beyond me, or go faster than the speed of light, or do something else, and get into the future before the future's happening, so that we can change it, so that when we got back to the present and then got to the future again, it would be a different future. Okay? Do you remember, you know, when we were kids learning about, you know, thinking about time machines? And so this is very similar to the Vaibhasika's idea. You know, that these things are truly existent, they're substantially existent, they have some substance, you know. The future exists in some substance, and the past exists in some substance. Okay? So, you know, the future pot is a real pot, but somehow we can't see it, and the past pot is also a real pot, but somehow we can't see that one either. Okay? So we can see that we have this kind of notion inside of ourselves. So Aryadeva is going to tear this notion apart, or put it another way, he's going to make us question it, okay? So, verse 251 says, the present pot and the past one do not exist in the future pot. Since both would be future, the future would not exist. Okay, so here we're refuting that time is substantially established by nature, and specifically refuting a substantially established future, and here showing the fallacies if the future were truly existent. Okay, so if the future really were truly existent, substantially existent, okay, then, okay, the present pot, okay, doesn't exist in the future pot, does it? Or does it? If the future pot already exists, isn't there some element of the future pot that's going to be the present pot? Isn't there going to be some element of the future pot that's going to be the past pot?
You said the other day that future exists.
Yeah.
So the pot that I have in my kitchen, they're going to be there tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
It does exist.
So the future pot, okay, we're not talking about your present pots existing tomorrow. Yeah, we're talking about the future pot. Yeah. So, you know, if we think about it, of course, the present pot can't exist in the future pot, and the past pot can't exist in the future pot. However, if the past, present, and future existed substantially, then they would have to, because you would have the future pot that would already be there, okay, and there would be an element of the present pot in that, because the pot, the future pot, has already become a pot, so it makes it kind of a present pot, doesn't it? Yeah. And it's also kind of a past pot, because how are you going to get the past pot if you don't have the future pot? Okay. Or you look at it in the way that the present pot the present pot doesn't exist yet, so the present pot must be a future pot. And the past pot doesn't exist yet, so the past pot must be a future pot. Do you get that way of looking at it? Okay. Let's see. The present pot doesn't exist yet. Isn't something not existing yet, although the causes for it to exist, isn't that the definition of future? So then wouldn't the present pot be the future pot?
Yeah, because the causes of the present pot are also the causes for the future. If there was substantial existence.
Yeah, if they have their own nature. Yeah. Or the past pot, the pot that has already arisen and has already ceased, that doesn't exist yet, does it? So isn't that past pot also a future pot? Okay, so this is what we're using to refute these people. Because, we would be saying, okay, if you're saying that the three times are all substantially existent, then the present pot would also be a future pot because it hasn't arisen yet. And the past pot would also be a future pot because the past pot hasn't come into being yet. Huh? Well, because we're focused on the future pot. So if you're focused on the future pot, the present pot hasn't arisen. So then the present pot is in the future, and the past pot is in the future. So then the present and the past are all future. Okay? So if you follow this way of thinking, it becomes nonsense. Okay? Yeah, because clearly the present and the past can't be the future. Each time has its own distinct, period. They don't overlap. The present doesn't exist in the future doesn't exist in the present doesn't exist in the past, and the past doesn't exist in the future. Okay? But if all these things had their own nature, then somehow they would have to, because they would all already exist in some way. Or they would all already not quite exist in some way. Okay? So that makes total nonsense. Okay? So that's one way to refute what they're saying. Then verse 252, if a disintegrated thing exists as a future entity in the future, how can what is future in nature become that which is past? Okay? So somebody says, our friend Joe Blow says, the past pot isn't non-existent in the future pot, since there's a part of the past pot that has not yet come into existence as an entity. So they're saying, yes, the past pot exists, but there's part of it that hasn't come into existence. So that part of it is a future pot. So, so the past is in the future. Okay? Because that past hasn't arisen yet. Okay. So if at the time of the future pot, the disintegrated pot existed in the future as something that had not yet come into existence, then the past pot would be future because it would be by its own entity that which hasn't yet occurred at the time of the future pot. Okay? Because the past hasn't occurred at the time of the future pot. Has it? Past pot comes after the future pot. Yeah. But somehow, if it's truly existent, it's attained some of its own, it's attained its own entity to some extent. So, yeah. Okay. And that which hasn't yet occurred at the time of the future pot would the past pot would be something that hasn't yet occurred at the time of the future pot. So the past pot would be future because it hasn't yet occurred. Okay. If this is so, then there would be no past, because something that it truly exists as the future cannot become the past. Yeah, I mean, something that's the future can't also be the past. Okay? These are difficult to understand. You have to kind of sit there for a while and think about it a little bit. Okay? Or another way to look at it, if the future in relationship to the pot, and remember, the future pot and the future in relationship to the pot are different. Okay? Because in relationship to the pot, the future is what comes later. Okay? So if the future in relationship to the pot is truly existent, it must be only future. So the past pot couldn't be the future, because the future must be truly existent, the future. Yeah. But remember when we were talking and we said in relationship to the pot, yeah, the future pot comes later, comes afterwards, it comes in the future. No. In relationship to the pot, yeah, the future of that particular pot comes later. Okay? Yeah. So it's kind of the opposite way than if we, yeah. In relationship to the pot, the past pot is going to happen in the future. But if all these things were truly existent, how could you say that the past pot is yet to come? Because the past pot would already have attained its entity. Yeah, and something that's attained its entity can't be something that is yet to come. Because something that is yet to come has not attained its entity, it isn't there yet. Okay? So also you get into this whole thing of if, normally as we were talking the last few weeks, a future pot is a cause of the present pot. But if the future pot were truly existent, it would be permanent, it could never change, so the future pot could never produce the present pot. Or if the future pot did produce the present pot, and because it was permanent, it didn't go out of existence, then the cause and the effect would exist at the same time. And in addition, the cause, the future pot, could keep producing more of the present pots because the cause was still there. Okay? So we get all these kind of absurd conclusions from thinking that the past, present, and future have their own entity or exist from their own side. Okay? Verse 253. Because of being future in nature, a future functional thing is thus present and cannot be future. So here, what we're doing, so this is a consequence that if the present is substantially existent, well, actually, if all of them are substantially existent. So if the future were substantially existent, then the future pot would be a pot right now. Okay? Because you could say the future pot exists now because it's a future pot. It exists as a future pot now. Yeah? So then the future becomes the present. Because the future pot exists now as a future pot. So then the future becomes the present. So then you have, again, all this craziness in not being able to separate out the past, present, and future. Okay? So those who say that time is permanent, okay, because there are some schools that say time is permanent. When they say time is permanent, what they mean here is that the future pot is permanent and the past pot is permanent. Okay? So if the future pot is permanent, that means it doesn't change moment by moment, so it can't be the cause of the present pot. And if the past pot is permanent, it can't be the result of the present pot. Okay? So if you're saying that time is permanent, then future things exist, and future things exist. Then it follows that the future pot is present because it already exists as a future substantially established thing. Okay? So something that is a substantially established entity must be present, present at the present time, since it has been produced and hasn't yet disintegrated. And in that case, the future pot can't be the present pot. I mean, the future pot can't be the future pot because it's already the present pot. Okay? So the whole point of all of this is showing, not only that that we get confused, but the point is that if we reify things and make them very concrete, then actually we can't explain anything in a logical, reasonable way. Yeah, and if we can't explain things in a logical, reasonable way, then there must be something erroneous about the way we're thinking. Yeah? Because if something doesn't hold up to reason, then, you can't hang on to it. Yeah?
I'm just wondering, surely proponents of the Vaishika tenets would not consider themselves illogical, unreasonable, idiotic,
No.
Which arguments do they use to make their points?
Yeah. So what arguments do they use to make their point? The future pot is a pot. I mean, just the way we were saying, you have a time machine and the future's happening, so there's a future pot. Or okay, so they would say it's substantially existent. Then there's but then the Sautantrikas, they would say that Sautantrikas here, that they would say that the future's permanent. And their reason is probably because when something's the future, it's just the future, and the future's totally distinct from the present. So the present's impermanent and changing, but something that's the future can only be the future, and something that's the past can only be the past, and it can't change. Yeah. Yeah, so that's what we say to them to refute their argument. Yeah? Yeah, but she's saying that the future, is dependent on causes and conditions. Yeah? So, the future can't be permanent. But, you can see sometimes how you could think the future's permanent. The future, it's there, it's predestined, it's already happening, except we just haven't caught up with it. The past, past is over, done with, you can't change it, so it's permanent. Yeah? So you can see how people would believe that kind of thing. Yeah? But then, if that were the case, then, we can argue back that then the future cake could never be the cause for the present cake, and the past cake could never be the result of the present cake, because the past and the future would just be totally frozen, and unrelated to causes and conditions. Okay? Yeah?
Maybe this is off topic, but does that mean that apart from that only the Prasangika Madhyamaka school posits something like a free will? No other schools don't? Future is solid, real, fixed, in other words?
No, everybody posits free will. But the problem with, if you say the past and future are fixed, is then somebody can disprove you by saying, oh, then there wouldn't be the free will. And that would go counter to any Buddhist's beliefs. Yeah, because everybody says there's free will. You know what's very interesting is this whole issue of free will never came up in India. It is not a topic that they debate at all. Yeah? So this thing that was so hot in the West and continues to be such a hot topic in the West, it's interesting that these great Indian sages who investigated so much never brought that up and never had an issue with it. Yeah? And I think it has to do with the fact that all of the Buddhist schools talk about dependent arising and causality. Yeah? So once you talk about dependent arising and causality, then causality implies a multitude of causes and conditions, which means that any small change in anything produces a different result. And so you can't have, this thing of everything being totally fixed, because there's just too many causes and conditions at play. So maybe that's why they didn't bring it up. Also, I think the idea that in Buddhism there is no creator, that may also contribute to the fact that it didn't get brought up. Because if you have the notion of a creator who is omnipotent and omniscient and has everything planned out already, and what happens is God's will, then it's very easy to believe in predetermination and fate. But in Buddhism, there's no idea of a creator, that made everything and that makes things happen and that controls things and has everything planned out and that has a will. Yeah, so removing that element, again, that gives you automatically more space for thinking, causes and conditions, different varieties. Yeah, so that may also be a reason it didn't come up in India. Or maybe someday we'll meet Chandrakirti's incarnation and we can ask him. Or better yet, maybe we can be like Jay Rinpoche and have a 911 line to Manjushri and ask the Buddha of wisdom directly. That would be nice, wouldn't it? 911 line to Manjushri. Okay. So verse 254, if the future, past, and present exist, and they're all substantially existent, okay, what does not exist? Okay, how can there be impermanence for one for whom all times exist? So if the past, present, and future all exist now, and all the things in the past, present, and future exist now, then how can there be impermanence of things changing from one moment to the next? Because they're all already there. So nothing would need to change in order to give rise to something that existed, because everything would be happening exactly at the same time. Okay, so tomorrow's pot, today's pot, yesterday's pot, everything is happening all at the same time. So you don't need to produce anything. And what would not exist, because everything would already be there. So then you don't need cause and effect. Yeah, you don't need anything. All you need is your time machine to work. Yeah.
So I guess what I'm stumbling on a little bit is the understanding of the future pot. Almost, I feel like it needs to have the same form as the present pot, but isn't an idea of the future pot or the present pot in my mind the intention to make said pot in the present? Isn't that also kind of being a future pot, and wouldn't that be able to exist at the same time as a pot in the present?
Okay, so when you're sitting here thinking of the pot that you're going to make tomorrow,
Yeah.
okay, your thought is existing in the present time.
And isn't that the cause and condition for the present?
Well, your imagination thinking, oh, tomorrow I'll make a pot, or better yet, make a cake. Tomorrow I'm going to make a cake. Okay, so your thought like that could be part of the cause of the cake because you're having an intention to make a cake. But that intention is not the future cake.
So even gathering all of the ingredients and the intention, isn't that, I don't know, maybe I'm...
No, because remember...
You walk in and says, I need you in the forest.
Yeah. So, because remember, the future is that which has not yet arisen. So your attention hasn't risen, and the flour and the baking soda and all those things already exist. Those things are present. So those things which are the cause of the cake, are not the future cake, because they already exist now. Okay. Okay. Then 255. This verse I'm going to go through quickly. This and the next, they're really hard. If it is past beyond the past, why is it past? If it has not passed beyond the past, why is it the past? Okay, so the best way I can put this together is if it is past beyond the past means if the past is past. Okay, so if the past is over, it's done with, then there's nothing. So if it has passed beyond the past, why is it the past? This is what I'm gleaning from it. I'm not saying it's correct, but this is the best I can do in understanding it. Okay? So it's like saying the past has ceased, so it's totally non-existent. So something that's totally non-existent, it can't be the past, because the past exists. It doesn't exist now, but it exists. Okay? And then the other two lines, if it has not passed beyond the past, why is it the past? Okay, so if it hasn't gone beyond being a past entity, then it must be a present entity that performs a function. Okay? So, basically saying a past substantially existent thing would still exist and perform its functions in the present if the past had not passed beyond the past. Let's go on to the next verse. 256. If the future is produced, why isn't it present? If it is unproduced, is the future permanent or what? So this one's a little bit easier. Although I think that thing that I said about the past, it makes sense to me, because we're refuting the past being substantially existent. Okay, so if the future is produced, why isn't it present? So if the future cake exists now, then why isn't it a present cake? Yeah. Okay. If the future is not produced, then isn't the future permanent? Okay, so for these people who are asserting asserting that the future is substantially existent, or that the future is permanent, if the future is produced because it's substantially existent, then, if the future cake were a cake, then it would be present. Okay? So why isn't it present? If the future cake would be a present cake. Yeah? If the future cake were unproduced, in other words, if the future cake didn't depend on causes and conditions, okay, then it must be permanent. The future cake would be permanent. Okay, so that's refuting the people, that say that the future's permanent. Because how can you say that the future is totally unproduced? Yeah. Okay, that would be like saying the future doesn't exist. Okay, if the future is impermanent, because though not produced, it disintegrates. Since the past does not disintegrate, why not consider it permanent? Okay, so if the future is impermanent because although not produced, it disintegrates, okay, so the future hasn't arisen, but it disintegrates and becomes the present, so it's impermanent. That's what they're thinking. So if the future is impermanent because although it's not produced, it disintegrates. Okay. Okay, if the future is impermanent, although not produced, the future is not produced, but it still disintegrates. But if things are substantially existent, they're already produced. Okay? So if the future hasn't arisen, but it disintegrates and becomes the present, then it must be impermanent. But that contradicts it not being produced, because something that's produced must be impermanent. Okay? Since the past does not disintegrate, because the past is permanent, then why don't you consider it permanent? So the past has already ceased, so it can't disintegrate, so it must be permanent. Okay? But again, that doesn't make much sense for the past to be permanent or for the future to become present. Okay.
What if the people that read the future or can tell that it will happen?
Okay, so what about people who foretell the future? First of all,
like some people that we say that we have a lifespan, we can work it out with and nourish it.
we have a what?
A lifespan,
Lifespan. Mm-hmm.
People know, well, you might live until 85, but that's how much you have for this life, and maybe if you take care of it, you will. If you don't.
Yeah. Okay, first of all, people who predict the future are not always correct. So some of them don't have accurate powers to see the future. Second of all, even if you at this moment have some kind of awareness to predict the future, in the next moment everything has changed. So at this moment, what seems like it's definite to exist, in the next moment, because everything's changed, it may not be definite to exist. Yeah. That's why if you ever work with a Tibetan Lama that does mows and divinations, you know they change, from moment to moment. Okay? And His Holiness always says, you never know the future until it happens. Which makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, the future depends on so many incredible number of causes and conditions, and it's not substantially existent. Yeah, it's dependent arising. So we never know what the final thing is going to be until it's there. Mm-hmm.
How does that happen? If it does happen,
Mm-hmm.
and so is it like the old...
How does what happen?
It does happen that people have a strong awareness of the possibility of the future.
Yeah, so they have a strong awareness of the possibility.
Right.
So sometimes the possibility is correct, and sometimes the possibility changes. Like she said, your cake, from tomorrow it's a future cake until Venerable Semke sends you out to the forest. And then the causes and conditions have changed.
But is it that they have some awareness of these potential causes and conditions that allows them to...
I don't know, because I think there's a lot of different ways. Some people have, some awareness of the future because of deep powers of concentration. Some people have awareness because of karma, and that they lose it later. So that, like all these different things, seeing the past, seeing the future, you can't really tell because there's so many different ways. People who have karmic abilities are, they lose the ability, there's nothing so special, and they're often wrong, and then, I mean, even you look in the scriptures, there's predictions the Buddha made about the existence of the Dharma that haven't happened. Yeah. So you never really know. I'm not saying the Buddha's not omniscient. I'm just saying that, everything is changing all the time. Yeah. So the point also here is, don't get too wrapped up in fortune tellers. Yeah. Yeah. I say this because I remember going to, who was with me, to that New Age fair. It was Venerable Chuni, I think. And there was some New Age fair in Spokane. So they invited us. They gave us a free booth. So we go down there with Dharma books, So on this side, there's some, some psychic. And on that side, there's a psychic. So all the psychics, they have long lines of people waiting to see them. We have nobody. And the people who go to see the psychic are like this, sitting in front of the psychic. They're just totally mesmerized, because of course the psychic is talking about them. Right? I mean, if the psychic were talking about somebody else, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting. But the psychic's telling my future. Wow. Well, I can tell your future. Next year you're going to get sick. Yeah? And next year you're also going to be healthy. Yeah? And I ask you, do you ever go by 1 year without getting sick? In your whole life, have you ever gone 1 year without a cold? Or the flu or something? Really? Good for you. Not me. Not me.
But incorrect, because often had a different experience.
Yeah. But so many of these things that, predicting, it's like, really, you go a whole year without a stomach ache? Without a headache? Without anything?
I think so. I mean, I just related to nothing that would ever stop me from doing anything. I mean, whatever it was. I don't, I rarely ever took the day off. for sick, that's really sick.
Yeah, but you can still be sick and go to work.
Yeah, but I mean, was steak. I think it's also steak.
Anyway, I rejoice. Good for you. Good for you. Yeah,
I'm confused about the definition of the past. Is it the ceasing of the cake or the
it's the having ceased of the cake.
cake is out of existence?
The cake has gone. The past cake is the cake's having happened. The cake's having existed. The cake that is at this moment disintegrating is not the past cake. It's the present cake that is disintegrating. It's the past cake that has disintegrated. Yeah.
You gave the example of if you don't put out the present to tomorrow, then that
It becomes the past cake. Well, if we don't, yeah, the past, yeah, the past cake. It's not that the past cake is the cake that has arisen and has already ceased. Okay, so when you're looking at the present cake in tomorrow, the present cake is the past. What is the present cake today becomes the past cake tomorrow because it's the having ceased. But the cake tomorrow that you see is the present cake of tomorrow. Okay? So it's the past cake of today, but it's the present cake of tomorrow. So isn't it the future cake of today? So it's the future cake of today.
The having ceased of the past cake is, the present cake is the result of the having ceased of the past.
No, the past cake is a result of the ceasing of the present cake. The present cake ceases, and that is the past cake. Remember, the past is what has come into being and has already ceased. Okay, so the present is the cause of the past. The present is what is disintegrating at this moment. And the past is what has disintegrated.
I wrote it down wrong.
Yeah. Okay,
The example that you gave, it is something like the cause produce an effect, and the same effect, the cause for the next.
Yes. Right.
And it goes on.
Right. Yeah, because one thing is the result of what came before it, and the cause of what comes after it. Okay.
So the past of the present cake would be the future of the future cake the next day, right?
The past
The past.
of the. Yeah? Yeah? What? Have an entity? No. Because if it had an entity, it would be a present cake. Yeah? So that's why the past and the future are non-affirming negatives. Okay? There's nothing you can point to and say, there's the future cake.
The only way this all makes sense to me is to think about the present cake as a form, the future cake and the past cake are abstract composites.
That's right.
That in my mind the whole time you're talking.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
kind of hold on to this.
Right.
sometimes.
Right. Right. Okay.
I want to make them into things. That's what I see
Yeah.
in my mind. I really
Yeah. You see how you want to make them into things? Yeah.
Now, is that
Yeah.
unique to the human mind or unique to the Western mind?
No, everybody's doing this, you know. I mean, we make things very concrete. It's like when you sit down to meditate, you know. Then all of a sudden you start dreaming about the past. Oh, I was with this person and we did this and we did that. Yeah. And none of that is happening now. That's all past. But the thought, the daydream is happening now, but those events are not happening now. Yeah?
The same with an addiction. I have anger in my mind, so that's already ceasing, but I think that so permanent there, I put it even in the future. I want to put an example more to myself. The pot doesn't make it so much, but
if you say anger, then it really gets you, You know, yes, I'm mad now, and my future anger exists, and my past anger exists.
You're an angry person.
Yeah, so I'm an angry person.
You're an angry person in the past, you're an angry person now, you're an angry person in the future, you're just...
Yeah. Yeah, that's the way we think, isn't it? Yeah? Yeah? It's something?
I'm still thinking about this from last week. Having ceased of an action connects the action to the result of the action. Can you help?
Okay, so when you've created an action, the action has ceased. That having ceased, or the having happened of an action, is something that exists, because it's different than the action never having happened. Okay? So the past thing is different. The past thing is not something that's totally non-existent, because it made a difference that thing did happen. Okay? So the having happened of that action, makes a difference, and it can cause a future result. Yeah, that's how you link the past action to a future result. Okay.
Is it necessary cause?
Huh?
Is it correct to say that the having ceased is a necessary cause?
Yeah. Yeah. According to the Prasangika.
There's also a story, it happened sometime in the past year, where this woman who was predicting fortunes for people, she was getting a lot of money.
Oh,
And
yeah.
she had this argument that what she was telling her clients at the time was true in that moment, but then causes and conditions.
Yeah, because she got prosecuted, didn't she? There was a huge court case against her for telling the future and not being accurate and deceiving people. Yeah.
You need a disclaimer.
Yeah, she needed to learn Aryadeva, that she could have said. Yeah, right, the small print. Beware, things change.